Is Star Wars for kids? That's something that's always been kind of a debate. And I was just so frustrated when I started seeing people say, oh, Star Wars is for kids, but they were using it as an excuse to justify poor storytelling. I hated that because the original trilogy wasn't just for kids. It also wasn't just for adults. It was for everyone. There's adult themes in it. Yeah, there's murder, there's genocide, there's all these different acts of violence in it. Yeah, there's adult content and themes in it. It's not just for kids. It's accessible to kids. And those are two very different things. Catering to someone, catering to a certain demographic is very different than making it accessible to one. Completely different approaches to storytelling. And I think it's completely justified to have opinions about what does or doesn't belong in Star Wars because the films, especially on screen, they've set the standard of what the storytelling approach is to this universe. And a lot of people have come to think of it as escapism, that this is a galaxy far, far away, and this is a space opera adventure at its heart. They can be nitpicks, but little things like the F word. Tony Gilroy wanted to have the F word in season 1 in the finale episode, and I'm glad that they said no to that. It adds a realism that we haven't come to expect in Star Wars. It kind of breaks immersion or prevents immersion. I don't want the F word in Star Wars. I also don't want sex scenes. That would be something that would alienate younger viewers. I don't remember it being said before, but now people are saying that Andor is definitely not for kids, that it's just for adults. But it's rated TV-14, at least domestically. But now I'm seeing that, oh, Andor is definitely not for kids as far as the adult content in it. But I also think that just the storytelling approach is very slow-paced. It's not in that same storytelling style of not even fast paced, just an even pace of action, because the prequels had lots of exposition. They had lots of conversations. They had political stuff going on, but the pace was much better when it came to making that accessible to children. It was a much more entertaining approach to it. I definitely think there's room for these darker, grittier stories. I just think IPs struggle when they're trying to be something else other than what they are at their core. Because, George Lucas is guilty of this as well. Are you creating a story and telling a story in a way that is organic? Or are you trying to sneak in there things that will cater or pander to one specific demographic? Because then I think it cuts against creativity. It doesn't feel natural to the story. There are edits of the prequel trilogy that really cut down on the antics with Jar Jar. Some things that are good and that don't hinder the story, but there are just some silly things and slapstick comedy with the droids that just take it a bit too far. And for me, when I watched it as a kid, I was in that age group. They're saying, oh, this is for kids. But I didn't like it. I didn't like it as a kid being pandered to. These moments that were clearly meant to make the kids laugh, but I didn't appreciate it then, and I don't like it now. And Disney's approach, too, has been to cater to women as well, and I don't like that either. I don't like being specifically catered to. I didn't like it as a kid. I don't like it as a woman, and I don't like it just as an adult. Because I think if you're catering to one demographic, that means you're also excluding others. It seems to hinder creativity. I just picture a bunch of people in a boardroom giving out production notes for whatever Star Wars project they're doing and saying, well, we need to attract the female demographic, so let's put more romantasy elements in it, like with The Acolyte. Put more stuff with female protagonists in it. It doesn't feel natural. And we can tell that. I think the audience can sense it. When the prequels are going on, it made for a very uneven tone. Consistency is important because when you go from slapstick droid comedy to then someone getting decapitated, what are you trying to appeal to? I just think you get into trouble when you're trying to appeal to or create a scene or create something just for one demographic, when it should be for everyone. And again, making something accessible to children is not the same thing as catering to them. So the original trilogy, I think, did it best as far as handling like humor and adult elements. Except with the Ewoks. Towards the end, yeah, they were definitely made for the kiddos. But overall, it does strike a very nice tone. And that's why Star Wars is such a pop culture juggernaut. That's why it was, because male, female, young and old, people from all over of different backgrounds and different ages could be immersed in this universe and stories and like these characters. It didn't alienate or exclude anyone from enjoying these stories. That's why it has such a huge fan base. And you know what? I think there's a place for stuff like Andor, definitely. I think these stories are great. The world itself that George Lucas created provides such a fertile ground for creativity and diverse stories. So it's not just Force stories, light and dark, Jedi versus Sith. There were so many different kinds of stories, and there were ones that went very dark. I think that's probably more towards the comics. I think that medium itself tends to be darker and grittier and rely more on visual, striking imagery to tell the stories, obviously. But there's also ones that follow X-Wings squadrons and smugglers and pirates and bounty hunters. And there's so many different kinds of stories. And I think a story like this should totally exist. This is very interesting to me. I love the concept of them creating this rebel network, because that was always a point of fascination for me. I just thought it was interesting that Luke and his friend Biggs, they wanted to join the Academy, the Imperial Academy. Their intention, though, was to defect. They already knew about this avenue to fight against the Empire, but they had to get off planet. They had to join the Empire in order to defect to the rebellion. I just thought that was a cool story itself to explore. I think it's interesting. These stories that are not based on Force using at its center, but yeah, just the regular folks trying to do their best to fight against the Empire. I mean, there's definitely really cool things in there, and I'm glad that it exists. I just don't think Disney Lucasfilm can afford to fracture the fan base. And it's always been, I think, their intention in their approach to content. It seems intentionally divisive. They look at the fandom, which again was made up of so many different demographics, male, female, young and old, all of that, and everything in between. But they've always wanted to approach their content with just looking at one demographic, one piece of the fandom, and make something specifically for them, split them into subsections, and make content exclusively for Clone Wars fans, or for OT fans, or prequel fans, or sequel fans, or women, or little kids, or adults. And I just feel like it's not in the best position to do that. I think it's only served to fracture and diminish their audience. If you were producing regular quality content that appealed to the broader Star Wars fan base, and then you wanted to experiment and do these darker stories, and then specifically ones for the little kids, okay, but you're not in that position. And when you specifically cater or pander to only one section of your potential fan base, you're also excluding everyone else. If they've been more consistent in their quality of stories, their tone and storytelling style, I think it'd be different. But as it is, they've been very inconsistent. And I think even Andor fans agree that the rest has just been mostly trash on Disney Plus. And this is the best that they've been able to produce. What lessons are they going to learn from this, I wonder? Because this is fine for a one-off, but does this just give them an excuse to just pump out trash and just say, well, it's for kids. This stuff is for kids now. I just wish they took everything with a serious approach. And when I say serious, I don't mean dark and dour. There's balance to be achieved here. And I think the original trilogy did it best. It wasn't perfect, but I think overall that was the formula. It was accessible to everyone. It was still an exciting adventure story. People liked it because of the world, the mythology, the characters. When I watched it, I was introduced to the original trilogy as a little kid, and never did I once feel that it wasn't for me. Star Wars, its fan base, the majority of it is male, but it never felt like it was made exclusively for them. I couldn't enjoy it because of that. No, it was accessible to everyone. I loved the worlds, the stories, the characters, and Luke Skywalker was my favorite. It had the right amount of humor and heart and adventure. It wasn't too silly, and it wasn't too adult. And so many times I've seen with Disney's content approach is to take Star Wars and make it into something else. It's either Goonies with a Star Wars skin, young adult romantasy with that Star Wars veneer with lightsabers. It's trying to rip off Dune. It's trying to rip off Lord of the Rings. It's trying to rip off itself by doing these weird member berries and dialogue and just stuff that we know what they're doing. They're trying to copy itself instead of just trying to uphold the motifs and themes and storytelling style of George Lucas to create something new. Star Wars shouldn't be anything else than what it is. It shouldn't try to be Dune. It shouldn't try to be Battlestar Galactica. It shouldn't try to be Game of Thrones. It should just be itself. Before, everyone was trying to be the next Star Wars, including Dune. I think the studio wanted it to look more like Star Wars, and that's why they put in weirding modules to avoid the kung fu and the sand dunes and try to make it look more space opera-ish. And they wanted to capitalize off of that Star Wars success. They wanted to be the next Star Wars. The opposite is now the case. There is space opera for adults. That's Dune. That's Battlestar Galactica. And Star Wars should be its own thing. It should be distinct. It should be unique in and of itself. It shouldn't have to try to be other genres and IPs. Star Wars should be Star Wars. Dune should be Dune. It should harken to that same kind of motifs that inspired George Lucas, because he was inspired by Dune, Buck Rogers, Westerns, samurai films, but he didn't copy those things. He was inspired by them. I just think that Star Wars has an identity crisis. It just doesn't know what it wants to be. Andor just doesn't seem to fit with everything else that they've made. And I think everyone can agree with that. It seems so different. How does this fit in the same world of Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett and Mando Season 3 and The Acolyte? It seems so different. They feel like two completely different universes. So if you're going to do these different things, they should feel like they belong to each other in the same universe. Andor fits more with the original trilogy than it fits with anything else. But also the Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor games, I think that actually fits very well with Andor and the prequel films. That's how it should be. I just feel like the approach should be to unite the fandom. The Mandalorian started out like that, adhering to the spirit of George Lucas's style. It was a small story, one man making his way in the galaxy. They should have kept with that of a Mandalorian bounty hunting. I think people really liked that. And the episodes in Book of Boba Fett where he's doing that, he's going after bounties, and I love that. They lost their way in trying to make it into something else. It should have been small, they should have kept it contained, but they saw its success, and then they just tried to use it to create the new MCU saga. Well, we gotta make this show to introduce Ahsoka, and we need to introduce Boba Fett because we're gonna do another show with that, and then it just became way too big and too contrived. But starting out, a lot of people liked that. And Mando Season 1, there is adult stuff happening. Someone gets cut in half in like the first few minutes. It opens up like a Western with the Mandalorian going into this remote cantina. That whole scene, that's Star Wars to me. They made him cool and it was interesting, just a small contained story of not anyone that we know. A lot of people wanted him to be Boba Fett. I wasn't of that opinion. I was like, no, just prove that you can create a new character that people like and are invested in. Prove that you can do that well, and then we'll go from there. It started out strong, and then they ruined it. That was an approach. That was a Western style motif. They should just kept with that. But you know what? The sequel trilogy just ruined everything. And that's why they're in this position where they keep having to go backwards. They keep having to go back to the prequel era or post Return of the Jedi. They have built nothing for themselves to foster creativity and new stories. They have to rely on what was done in the past because that's what people like. This is interesting. This part of the timeline where the rebels are coming together. They're forming this network, this spy network to take down the Death Star. They're arranging all of these things. That's interesting. And that is from George Lucas era Star Wars. For the prequel trilogy and its faults with some of the dialogue and some of the storytelling approaches there, it expanded and enriched this universe in a way that other creators could come in and tell a vast array of different stories that I really loved. And that's why they're still creating stories around that time period now. The best parts are set within the past. And when they try to do something different, they don't know how. They don't know how to tell new stories because they don't know what makes Star Wars, what makes it unique, and what fosters creativity. The Phantom Menace, yeah, it has its issues. Personally, I think that's the best lightsaber duel in all of Star Wars. Just absolutely epic and dramatic and tragic. People love Revenge of the Sith and the Mustafar duel, but I think that's my favorite. And I love the pod racing game too. I played that so much as a kid. And I loved Star Wars Bounty Hunter too. That actually made me really like Jango Fett's character. We didn't see him that much, but he was cool looking, but we didn't really get to explore his story. So Star Wars Bounty Hunter did great. And Knights of the Old Republic, some of the best stories ever were created off of the foundation of the prequel trilogy. So for its faults, it provided a rich environment of creativity and new stories. That's the thing too with Star Wars, and it's always been the case for me. I don't like everything that has the Star Wars label on it. There are just certain things that resonate with me more. Personally, I love the classic battle of the light side versus the dark side. I love the old Republic era, showcasing like the rule of two with Darth Bane and Revan and the new Jedi Order. I love that. I love the new era of what that meant for the new Jedi and for forging a new path that hopefully wouldn't lead them to the same destruction as before. That's interesting, but there's tons of things that just don't connect with me. It's a vast universe of storytelling with the EU. That's what's so great about it. We had so many different kinds of stories that appeal to so many when they have different tastes. If they like the bounty hunter stuff, there's plenty of that. There's plenty of smuggler stuff. There's plenty of rogue squadron stories. Even with the stories within themselves, there's tons of ensemble characters that offer a vast array of different journeys. And I don't know what the approach is going forward, because the sequel trilogy is a giant dead end. You cannot create with what they've done and established in the sequel trilogy. They've made it a dead end. Which is why, by the way, that The Mandalorian went off the rails, because when Grogu started to get uber popular, everyone was saying, oh wait, Grogu can't go with Luke because that means he's gonna die. Because we know that all of his students die. That's the sequel trilogy. Any Force user that gets introduced post Return of the Jedi and under Luke's tutelage, they're likely going to die. Thanks, Lucasfilm. Thanks, Disney. When it comes to Andor, this is one of those stories. It's another story, and this is probably the best that they've done are non-Force user stories, because they can't get the Force right. So don't even try if you don't know what you're doing. I get it. But eventually, yes, we want those stories too. We want those to have the same kind of quality of storytelling. But Andor, it's not bad that it's focused on these little things, these more human things and more grounded elements. And it's not bad that it's for more adult sensibilities. It's the best Star Wars show by far that is only for adults. I just feel like there should be other things appealing to all of the rest of the fan base too. We should be this passionate about other things, about other offerings, but they just don't know what they're doing. Like, they just tried to do a version of the Old Republic with their High Republic era with the Acolyte, and it was atrocious. And it was very much in the style of a Harlequin romance with a Star Wars skin. The way it painted the Jedi as the bad guys and the Sith as sympathetic. And it's just so sad, because if other portions of the fan base were being fed with quality Star Wars stories, I don't think this would be as contentious. But they're not doing anything else well. The sad thing about Andor is it reminds us of how lesser everything else is.